everybody, welcome. Very excited to be here with you today. My name is Enara. I'm a founder and marketer specializing in emerging technology. So things like avatars, virtual worlds, consciousness, other odd stuff. Fun fact, I used to work for TOA and used to produce this conference several years ago. So it's really wonderful to be back on stage with our incredible guests. We're joined by 3 Berlin-based experts who are focused on 3 different areas of innovation. And we'll be talking about innovation in the context of building next generation consumer experiences as it pertains to brands and how do you transform those stories using new technology. So first, I'm very excited to introduce you to Alex Ilk. She is a head of product at Dematerialised. Dematerialised is a company that launched in 2020 and has completely taken the world by storm in the category of digital fashion, crypto collectibles. So would you mind telling us what is Dematerialised up to now and how did you join the company?
Thank you, Nara, for the nice introduction. So I've been with DMAT DMAT short for the Dematerialized, so we don't stumble over the word, first of all. I joined the company 2 years ago, so shortly after we launched, and kind of at the very beginning was working in all kinds of fields and transitioned into head of product over a year ago, working closely with our development team and our UX team, which is super exciting. So we are selling essentially digital fashion, so clothing that exists in virtual spaces, some of them which are also physically produced, but we tend to focus on the digital only clothing. And we kind of offer a full service also for brands to onboard them into Web3. So we have a blockchain-based backend, and all of our clothes are sold as non-fungible tokens.
Wonderful. Up next, we have the co-founder of Yoona.ai and Franziska Miche. We ended up meeting at an incredible event that she organized for experts in that field this January. And you've been working with so many big brands. I'm curious to find out, how did you end up starting Yoona.ai and what are you up to today?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I was working as a designer over 15 years. I recognize that we are all in the whole world working manually. And I started to learn coding and went into the field of AI, using neural networks to cut down my processes, first of a designer, and then I went to all the fashion companies in Germany and later on and also in Europe, and decided with my co-founders to found Yoona, which is a platform using AI to analyze data, trends, and so on, and providing products in seconds and also color concepts, everything was what a fashion company needs. And I realized that I have to educate every company where I'm going to. So we founded a conference series, it's called Universe, where you went also. And we are bringing all the technology providers, all the startups together and all the brands and also other industries. And for us, it's very important that we build a community around innovation and technology.
And if anybody is looking for other Berlin-based organizations that run quite a few after-hours events, so both Yoona.ai and Journee focus on that. Last but not least, we have the co-founder of Journee. The work that you've been publishing through Journee is actually an amazing example of both something that's pushing the technical limits of the medium as well as the aesthetic limits as well. So when you have to work with a larger brand and you work with H&M, BMW, there is a certain level of expectations that they bring with them when they want to engage with a new tool. So how did Journee came to be?
First of all, thank you for already doing the pitch for me now. We started 3 years ago. And what we've built today is a leading enterprise platform for immersive web. You could call it spatial web, like Apple does. You could call it metaverse, like Facebook does. Or you could call it immersive web. It's about providing the SAP for immersive web, meaning a solution that enterprises and brands can use to bring parts of their .com to the next era of internet, basically after text, JPEG, videos, immersive, interactive 3D worlds. And how it came to life, you cannot plan something like this, right? You just start and then you take it from there. And we started 3 years ago, me and my co-founder, who's a creative technologist, genius level, Christian Leclerc, and just went where things took us, basically. And now we're quite big. We have offices in Dubai, Stockholm, New York, Cape Town, and Berlin, and are proud to say we're the most award-winning metaverse company in the world as of today.
That's not a light award to carry. And when we're talking about all of these technologies in the context of crypto, collectibles, AI technology, metaverse, we're all thinking of new ways of how we're pushed to explore communication. What does it mean to tell better future-forward stories? And brands, at the end of the day, are some of the world's best and most interesting stories. So when we're looking at the way CDs became MP3, how cash transformed into digital payments, we're now at this next moment in history where technology is changing yet again, but there's also an interesting degree of fragility that brands have where they have to maintain a certain status quo. So if today everybody from an individual creator to a small business to a multi-billion-dollar company are focused on figuring out what type of brand are they meant to build, that can be a difficult question to answer. So I'm wondering, how do you define digitization? Because at different phases of the internet, at first it meant acquiring your first .com and building a website. Then it meant getting into e-commerce, hiring your first millennial to run your Instagram account. So what does digitization mean to you today?
I actually thought about that a lot before I joined this talk, because it can mean so many different things. That's kind of the conclusion that I came to. So nowadays, when we talk about digitization, we're not talking about kind of that first step of like going from paper to computer, right? That simple step. But there's so many different avenues that you could go. So whether it is digitizing business processes or digitizing your production line, so particular in fashion, that would mean bringing in 3D models or certain tools that streamline your production. But it could also mean bringing in more digital tools into marketing. So of course, the jump from kind of print marketing or print commercials to film commercials to e-commerce and Instagram and social media commercials and everything, that was a whole evolution. But then on top of that, in your commercial making, having digital products and using digital products. So for me, for today, I kind of define it as digitizing product, since that's also what we focus on. We have that challenge of bringing a product a fashion garment that is typically physical and you can wear on your body into the digital space where people ask us a lot, what can I do with it there and how can it actually be used? But it actually turns out it can be used in so many different ways. So all of the things that I just mentioned, kind of the 3D production, that can save you a lot of costs and that can save you a lot of time, but also in marketing, all the way to opening up an entirely new customer stream of people that are purchasing digital collectibles. So there's a lot in that term, honestly.
Yeah, and that probably applies differently to a different brand. So if you're a brand that is primarily marketing physical products, having a digital copy can help you market them better or faster, or learn something new about a digital replica of a product, or maybe sell something fully virtual altogether. So that's an interesting category to explore. What would you say, Anna, about that?
Thank you. It's interesting that you say from paper to computer, but actually when I go to even big fashion companies, they are still with paper. And they're starting to print out things again sometimes. So sometimes in bigger companies and corporates, we have to fight for the paper to computer. But what I see as the future is that we are totally digitized, from AI analyzing, AI creation of products. We create directly bestsellers. It's like click, click, click production, or to the digital field. I see it also that we do A/B testing as fashion brands and not just selling what we believe. And then later on, of course, we go with the digital product, but also in production, we can digitize a lot. There are startups already thinking about how a digital sewing process can go. And for me, is it the whole value chain from A to Z, what we need to digitize also to be more sustainable. And not only efficient.
Yes, efficiency and sustainability can go hand in hand, but sometimes it's a difficult balance to hit. And Thomas, I think for you, as you're building worlds that are completely virtual, they of course don't come with absolutely zero cost. Hosting, everything else that comes into that. I'm wondering, how do you define digitization for brands? And as well, if you could share maybe an example of a brand that has done a successful transition into that space.
So first of all, digitization today, what does it mean, right? I think you could simplify it by there was a phase of Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. And when I speak about Web 3, I'm not only speaking about blockchain-based internet, an on-chain-based internet, but let's detach it from that term. But it is basically a phase of the internet we're entering now that is coming after the World Wide Web phase from 1990 to 2005 and the social web from 2005 to 2020. E-commerce, social web, all of that was successful the last decades, to what you could call a innovation on multiple ends. It's a combination of AI-enabled content, not user-generated content anymore, but AI-generated content, potentially blockchain-based applications, and an immersive, interactive 3D user interface. Okay, that combination will determine the next 15 years of the internet. Those three components and all together will lead to a lot of innovation. So when we speak about what does digitization mean today, in upcoming years it will be this combination. And now if you say which brand has successfully digitized, we need to speak about which digitization, because there are still some brands, like Anna said, who need to move from paper to digitizing something. I think what you are referring to is who is already leveraging the potential of this next iteration of the web successfully, right? And there we've seen a couple of very successful examples. For example, Nike, who's definitely at the forefront from a branding perspective, but also from the technological perspective of what they do and how they leverage different technologies, but also from a community understanding perspective. They're just very good at understanding what the Web3 nerds want and are hyped by.
Can I ask you specifically, as a brand, like let's use Nike as an example, what did they do right that puts them in this category of somebody who's made it, at least in this transitory state of what we call digitization today?
Yeah, so Nike has been understanding what the early movers of Web3 ecosystem are about, what they like, what they are hyped about, and how to credibly attract them and address them. Because many, now we're speaking about really a niche crypto scene that is very particular in how they want to be addressed. And understanding that credibly and the culture behind it, in general, is something that Nike is very good about, right? Understanding community, understanding culture, and translating it to the brand. And there they've been very good at bringing something to that ecosystem that ecosystem was attracted by, hyped by, and spent money on. So it was already a very nice example of multi-million-dollar launch. However, I also need to say that when I speak about this next iteration of the internet, it's not just about these type of campaigns and launches to a specific, very still quite nerdy and niche ecosystem. It is attracting billions of people. This is what's the next iteration. And I feel there's a couple of examples of brands that we also work with, like BMW. They just bring mass market stuff to the Web3, like cars, together with an immersive co-play concert that we've done on our platform. So all of a sudden you have millions of people going to this immersive, interactive, innovative co-play concert and experiencing the brand BMW in a completely new way, right? And this is an example of a mass market successful story.
It seems like as a metric, it's really important to see that it's not just the early adopters that are showing up and downloading the app that are playing with it, but people that are our parents, our friends who are not in this industry that are also starting to engage with the medium as a pretty good signal that we're figuring something out here. Anna, do you have any examples of brands you've either worked with or observed who you think are getting it right?
I just thought of Burberry. Also, they are doing a great job. And we are working, for example, with Desigual. We don't think that they're very fast forward, but they have a very good innovation lab, which brings all the digitization to them. And I think they're quite good in that also.
Alex?
I think I want to add kind of brands that aren't traditionally seen as brands and some of the people we've worked with. One example in particular is Teflon Sega, who is a singer-songwriter, but born in the metaverse, basically. So there's people or companies who are entirely making use of this new movement and are kind of born out of it. So I think those are also super interesting to highlight. So what Teflon Sega does super well is build a community, build his fan base around his music, but then also use Web3 tools and digital products to continue building his brand and excite fans. So an example of that would be a launch that we did with him where we sold digital collectibles that were also used in a story that he told with his music and in a music video, and kind of had an Easter egg hunt with his community.
And if you think about musicians or people that are figures in entertainment business, a lot of them don't just influence their vertical. Beyond being musicians, they're also fashion icons, they're lyricists, they're poets, and there's so much opportunity to figure out how can you contextualize some of what they're creating into products and into other experiences. I promised no trick questions, but it doesn't mean I won't press some buttons. So if somebody were to talk about innovation, a really good definition that I found on the internet is that innovation equals to your tolerance for risk. So if somebody who works in a brand, you have to figure out at which point do we jump into this, at which point do we start participating, and what is it going to cost us if something goes wrong, or what are we going to do, how do we respond to that? So keeping in mind the opportunity that we all just talked about, what about the backlash that the current emerging space has experienced? So for example, in crypto, there was an article recently where Justin Bieber's Bored Ape that he acquired for 1.3 million is now 95% devalued. In the metaverse, there was a scathing article from The Verge talking about how the most recent Decentraland Metaverse Fashion Week had a lot of brands participating, but it still felt quite clunky and lonely, and it didn't really deliver on the promise of the marketing campaigns. And then with AI, Snapchat was recently under the looking glass for releasing an AI chatbot that was interacting with underage teenagers in quite an inappropriate way. So it's tools that have incredible positive benefits that also carry quite a large responsibility of how do they actually land within our marketplace. So I'm wondering, considering how fragile a brand image is and how many years it takes for you to cultivate it, what advice would you give to a brand that's listening to us in this audience of how to overcome these obstacles and not lose sight of the opportunity and their core values? Alex?
I think that for a brand in general, what's always been super important and will continue to be important is the audience and the target group and who you're speaking to. So as a brand, you usually have the goal to create a community around your brand, create your brand image, and gather a following. And the cool thing is Web3 is all about that, right? Web3 is users wanting to be involved in a brand, so even closer than before. And we don't just see this movement in kind of digital products and Web3, we also saw it in social media in itself. So the way that the way that brands have presented themselves on social media became much more personal once it moved to kind of speaking to customers in the comments, opening Instagram stories for customers and those types of tools. And now on TikTok, we actually see brands that are kind of like your best friend. So we have Lufthansa or Ryanair making super funny videos on TikTok that you wouldn't have seen 5 or 10 years ago because they're making fun of themselves. So coming back to kind of what I want to say is for brands to kind of figure out their way in this space, it's important to still figure out what is their target group and then maneuver accordingly. So if you want to reach those customers that are in those spaces, go down those paths, but also make sure that you're reaching those people that you actually want to talk to. So if you want to reach young people, if you want to reach people in the Web3 space, then find a way to experiment. I think what's also great about the scene or the market is that there's a lot of super easy ways that you can already trial, and because these users are so close, they're so willing to give you feedback. So I think also coming back to the backlash that you were talking about, all of the Web3 projects that have seen backlash, I think those users are very loud, of course, in opening their critique, and it's definitely something to be aware of before entering, but at the same time, they're also incredibly forgiving, and they always give a second chance, and they're super open for kind of, evolving together. So I think that's a big opportunity and nothing to be afraid of to join.
This almost sounds like life advice. Know who you are as a brand before you show up in a space. Anna?
So I'm just thinking about AI, and when we use AI, it's not quite obviously for the customer themselves that we're using that to produce normal clothing. So I didn't see anybody who changed their form or their way of creating or their way of producing that they directly communicated to the customers. When I saw that, and I thought it was quite transparent. They're saying, so we use now new technologies, but you know, it's also more sustainable and giving all the numbers, what it makes better when you buy this clothing. And this is also my advice, be transparent and authentic and keep going to be the company and the brand you are.
I recently heard a challenge in the context of AI and sustainability. Who is going to be the first brand in the world to create a fully transparent supply chain from the moment that they source the fabric? Who does it go to? How does it actually transfer hands? And it can seem like a full re-engineering of a department, but think about the value add, because this is exactly what consumers are asking for. So when you're talking about this challenge, it can seem hard to begin because it's such a large overhaul, but the opportunity to redesign for the future is quite impressive. Thomas, your ideas on what would you advise brands to navigate the space?
Well, when you started that question, you were listing out a couple of examples of stuff that did not go right? And let's face it, there was a lot of bullshit also happening in this Web3 emerging space, including a lot of crypto bets that just didn't, they were just scam, okay? And obviously, what may not happen is that you judge the general idea behind something and the new technology and the opportunities behind that by some examples of what is going wrong. So it's just like, will AI make sense? Yes, of course, right? Does your assessment of AI depend on that Snapchat example? Well, hopefully not, right? And I think that's something to consider. Now, we work a lot with like really luxury brands, so luxurious that I'm not even allowed to mention the name because the projects are not released yet. And they were very cautious about when to do something in this space because just like you said, it's super crucial for them to not fuck anything up, right? If you're a 100-year-old luxury brand, then this is your core asset. And if you do it, you need to do it right and properly and stable. It needs to work. It needs to be very smartly executed. And I think there's definitely a certain threshold that needs to be crossed in terms of, let's say, technological maturity, where you should feel comfortable to enter, but not in the very first days of still prototyping, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you definitely feel good in the hands of somebody who doesn't push you to jump into something before you're ready. So I think especially if you're a luxury brand and you understand the patience it took to build the brand and approaching innovation with the same patience, I think it's probably makes a brand feel better. So bottom line, don't rush. And the fact that you're in this room and are learning already is part of the process of figuring it out. The first week of June was a very big deal for people like me and maybe some people in this room. It was the release of the Apple Vision Pro headset. As somebody who's worked in AR, VR, this was a very awaited moment because there's been a stall and an anticipation for what is Apple's move going to be next after they release the iPhone. So there's some words that started to enter our vocabulary, like a post-iPhone era, and talking about the future of computing. Will the screens go away completely? So I'm wondering, as this revolutionary device, dubbed to be the next iPhone moment, enters the market, how will it transform your field and what opportunity could it potentially present for a brand?
So for us at the Dematerialised, AR and VR are incredible technologies that allow digital fashion to be worn, right? So for us, that was a huge announcement and we were all super excited to look at that. And yeah, I think that it will take some time, of course, until it really comes into mainstream that people are wearing VR glasses, but it allows us to already start experimenting with ways of how to include that in the utilities. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the question we get most often is, how do I actually wear digital clothing? Where do I wear it? And essentially there's kind of two main fields that we're focusing on. In VR, we have avatars, so we can wear them on our digital bodies. And then in AR, we can wear them in augmented reality on our physical bodies through, for example, now through Snapchat filters or Instagram filters. So I think we'll see a lot of those technologies shift from our phone and holding up something to our glasses. And what's so cool about the Vision Pro is that Apple just did it super well. They fixed kind of all of those mainly UX problems that VR glasses still had around being able to kind of navigate and like the dizziness and being able to see who's actually standing next to you in physical dimension and all of those things. So I think that's definitely going to be super interesting as we start experimenting with that more and more.
Exciting times. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, this is the future. Maybe in the future we will all sitting with this glass and nobody will be here anymore. But for fashion, it's a really big thing because we try to cut all this down to have to try your clothing on, to work against these returns and all what you have in fashion, because you have to go to the shop or you have to order it on e-commerce. So I think this is the future for us, to cut down value chain, to be more sustainable, and also, I mean, digital products from A to Z, what I said before, just a normal, holistic way of digitization.
Thomas?
So I said earlier that there was Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and this Web 3 will be defined by a user interface that is interactive, immersive 3D, right? And now you could question that and say, well, Thomas, a nice bet. But with first Meta stepped on stage, their execution may be lacking behind, but they believe in this internet era. And now Apple also stepped on stage, and Apple is the UX company in the world, right? And if they say that the internet will move to 3D, I have an easier pitch, I can just say, because it's who is questioning that now? Now, when it comes to this device in particular, the glasses, no matter if it's from Meta or from Apple, I believe it's still 5, 7, 10 years until this will have a real relevance, because it still requires some technical adoptions and still some technical developments, even though the Apple device is already very good. But it also requires a market adoption, not 200,000 glasses being sold, but 5 billion glasses being sold, because that's currently the market adoption of smartphones. And it requires a cultural adoption, because I'm not sure if we will ever sit here with those glasses. And I hope, to be honest, I don't hope so. So probably you will still only wear them in certain specific situations in your life. And that leads us to the question of, okay, then if immersive 3D internet with AI-enabled content has a lot of relevancy for different use cases, on which user interface, on which screen do we experience it? And I believe that the next couple of years, it will still happen on our smartphone and our computer, because that's just the devices that are out there. It will also happen, and we are already embedded in automotive windows, where you can fade in reality and fade it out. The CEO of BMW has presented that at CES in Las Vegas in January. So there will be more and more screen types, but the glasses themselves, I feel, still have some time to go until it's really mass market and we're all wearing them 7 hours per day. I hope that, I don't know if you want to wait for that.
Yeah, I mean, looking at our phones, if you have that enabled where you can see how many hours a day you actually spend on your phone, you'd be shocked the amount of time you spend in front of a device. So at least, hopefully, 7 or more. I think mine is definitely more.
In average, 5 billion people per day spend 7 hours digitally already today. And that's what I mean. We're not going to have 5 billion people spend 7 hours per day next year wearing glasses, okay? It's just not going to happen. But it will continue to happen that people are spending time on these screens.
An interesting thing you mentioned is cultural adoption, which is something that brands are going after quite quickly. But if we look at a theory of diffusion of innovation, for example, before a computer was reduced from a size of a cooled room to becoming a PC, it was several decades. It didn't happen overnight, but when a device comes out, because of the news cycle and how quickly we receive news and place expectations on it from also Hollywood films and the priming that we have from something like Ready Player One of what we expect the future to look like today, it's followed by disappointment or an overinflation of expectations. So I love how each one of you contributed a piece of how today you can start moving in this direction, and that potentially maybe in the future, mega companies are going to be made up of several components. For example, a virtual world with an AI-enabled content, plus digital collectibles, and maybe there's some other way of how we're expecting to be working in the future. I think as everybody who's come here, we're relying on your expertise to also get a gleam and a peek into the future. So I'm wondering, well, how are you imagining the next, let's say, 1 to 3 years? I'm going to shorten my horizon here and not go too far into the future. How do you imagine these 1 to 3 years providing opportunities for brands to level up and also build a future-proof brand?
I think that, as what was already mentioned before, is that a lot of experimentation has been going on in the past 1 to 2 years. A lot of failed projects, a lot of successful projects. So we're in that phase of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's going to continue for another while. So I don't think that's going to go away in the next year or so. I think that it's still the front runners. It's still kind of the early people. We're just starting to talk about this more and more and more, and we're starting to get bored about talking about it slowly. And that once that kind of has passed away and faded away, and people have gotten used to the thought, and we've kind of tried out enough, and enough users have also found themselves in that space, then it will really, we're going to start seeing really cool and fun things. And I think that, yeah, a lot of people will open up to what's possible there.
Anna?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the brands we are working with, most of them are not into digitisation. So it's very few brands. We talked about 2 now, Burberry and Nike. But I see a lot of brands, they are afraid of change and risk. So 2 to 3 years, I don't know. So some of them, they don't even have innovation labs or something like that. They don't understand that innovation means also failure. So I cannot even say that we are holistic adapted in 2 to 3 years. I would say not. It's a long cycle to get there.
And you mentioned innovation labs a couple of times. There, especially luxury brands, spend quite a lot of their resources on building an innovation lab in order to go through these experiments. So that's, before they ship a product, they figure out amongst themselves what works and what doesn't. Aston Martin, for example, since you mentioned cars, they are releasing, I think, less than 100,000 cars per year, or maybe, no, sorry, since the beginning of Aston Martin, they've released less than 100,000 cars. So it's a very luxe, slow release type of product, and they are envisioning a future where you no longer will need to drive an Aston Martin, and what kind of entertainment can you explore on the board of such a car? So I'm wondering if you're imagining that type of future being explored even sooner by luxury brands, simply because they can afford it and have the resources deployed for that.
100%. Yes. So I like that you spoke about 1 to 3 years, because there's so much happening. We're now in this for 3 years, and so much has happened since in that time. I would not feel equipped to give a projection for the next 4 years, but I am equipped to give you a view into the next 1 to 3 years, and what we will see, because it's already happening, it's right now in execution, many ends, is that websites will embed interactive, immersive components where you can have interactions with AI-based avatars, potentially, that answer you with the voice of Michael Jordan when you want to buy that sneaker, that virtual one or that physical one or both. That's the very short, low-hanging fruit of internet innovation that we will see happening. So it's that the websites will turn immersive and interactive and AI-enabled.
Incredible. I'm looking forward to it. Please join me in thanking our guests tonight. Thank you for all your insights. Excited to go to the next panel.
Thank you.